So today we're going to talk about the great state of Minnesota. Minnesota is a Midwestern state. Its name basically comes from the Native American word Dakota, which means clean blue water. Right now it's the 12th largest state by area and the 21st most populous state in America. However, Minnesota has been having some issues, especially regarding the water quality of their, 10,000 lakes, where they get their nickname, the land of 10,000 lakes. So today we're going to look at how Minnesota's water quality has gone from pristine to deadly. So here's some pictures of Minnesota. Like I said, it's called the land of 10,000 lakes, and the lakes and the scenery and how beautiful it is basically Minnesota's wonders. So I want you to imagine basically what in your mind when you think of Minnesota, what do you see? Personally, I see like a really beautiful lake, roaring rivers, crisp, it's blue, the hills are rolling, and it's just 100% wonderful. It basically could be something that's on the cover of Field and Stream. However, this current water state is turning into these issues. So Minnesota has some of the largest cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, all those great places. And, along with big cities, you get a bunch of, urban runoff, pollution, contamination, everything like that. However, the biggest issue right now that's happening in Minnesota is the excess nutrients that's running into the water that's causing, people to get sick and actually is contaminating, what's supposed to be drinkable water for people, and it's causing them not to be able to have fresh water to drink. So this is going to be the idea that we're going to look at today. If you guys didn't know, I'm Mandy Chapman. That's a picture of me out in the field and everything. I don't know, I'm a master's student in environmental science and I love aquatic toxicology, so I hope you enjoy this presentation. Alright. So, we're going to look at the history of the declining water quality of Minnesota from back in the day, and then we're going to see how it is right now. So the first settlers came to the Minnesota Territory in about the 1800s. During this time period, there was a large focus on minerals. So, iron and anything else that can basically come from the land, that's what these people were looking for. Well, some settlers were in the northeastern section of Minnesota, and they found a region that had a ton of iron and other minerals that basically they were all interested in. Once word got around that this area, the Iron Range, was here in Minnesota, a lot of people started settling in Minnesota, so then they could make a livelihood and be able to sell some of these minerals for some money. So that's where the massive boom of population came from Minnesota. A lot of the people that came there also realized how beautiful the state was, and they saw new economic ideas and new livelihoods that they could live here in Minnesota. One of the things that's really cool is that Minnesota had one of the first groundwater recordings in the United States. They didn't realize, but while they were expanding all their areas and everything like that, I'm assuming that somebody was looking at a creek and realized that it was coming out of the ground, and then they started thinking, hey, maybe there's not just surface water, there's actually groundwater also. So this was a really big step in, the development of what our society is today, because without groundwater today, we wouldn't be drinking a lot of water, or we wouldn't be having all the amenities that we do have, because there wouldn't be enough surface water for industry and humans. So the first groundwater recording here in Minnesota was an awesome thing that happened. However, although, everything in Minnesota was going great, people saw new horizons, they saw, the idea of prosperity and everything like that, human desire always causes negative impacts in the areas that they're surrounding. Now, not necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying that humans always ruin everything, for the most part, once one human's there and they realize that there's a reason to be in this area, more humans show up, and then those humans are like, well, we want to have it our way. Nobody can get along. Then they start using and taking for granted their environment surrounding them, so then they can provide for themselves. Agriculture prospered in this area. A lot of people saw that the soil type and also the climate, because there's 4 seasons here in Minnesota, basically were pristine for agriculture. And they also realized that they could use the groundwater as an extra source of water from the roots up in their crops. So this agriculture boom in Minnesota has been occurring for about 200 years now in Minnesota. There were other economic drivers that helped Minnesota become the state that it is today, and some of those were timber, mineral extraction, you know, all that good stuff. However, agriculture is really the backbone of this state. Without agriculture, Minnesota probably would not have been the state that it is today. The only problem with this, you know, boom of agricultural ideas and prosperity and farmlands everywhere was the fact that, yeah, you can use the groundwater to provide water for your crop's roots, but nobody really understood what groundwater was and just how valuable it was. They didn't realize that, you know, hey, we're just gonna plant a bunch of crops out here, you know, use up all the nutrients in the soil, and we're just gonna have this awesome economic driver that's never gonna end. However, they didn't realize that eventually either the soil's gonna give out, the groundwater is going to be polluted, you know, the crops aren't going to do as well without uses of chemicals. You know, nobody thought about that back then. So basically, the state is attempting to control their water quality. Like right now there's a lot of problems associated with water quality, but actually prior to 1965, there was in 1965, the DNR and the USGS study, which recorded about groundwater quality between the years of 1899 and 1963, basically found that based on the parameters that they use, which granted, you know, they don't look at all the things that we would look at right now. They don't look at, you know, maybe pH. They didn't understand what conductivity was, all that stuff. But what they did know was, you know, metals create ions and nutrients create ions and all this stuff. So they looked at the ion concentrations. They also looked at some of the inorganic parameters. And they used this very small sample set that they had for those 64 years. But they found that there was no change in groundwater quality from prior to, you know, maybe at the very beginning of civilization there in Minnesota to 1963. And that was tremendous. That was awesome. Like, the state was very proud of itself and was super excited to ensure that its groundwater never got to a point of horrible contamination. However, nonetheless, this time of bliss where, you know, humans were one with their environment did not last very long. Between the years 1970 and 1980s, there were actually new ideas starting to formulate around, you know, the governments, the agencies, the states, and everything like that, on how to properly test water and ensure that it was healthy and safe for human consumption. These changes caused the state of Minnesota to change the regulations regarding both well building, feedlot building requirements, and also municipal systems buildings for wells. These changes basically called for new sampling techniques, and we're trying to prevent things from leaching into these wells so then people could be healthier, but they also were saying, hey, we've got to figure out different testing ideas so then we can make sure that this water is healthy for, you know, Bob and Jane on their personal well, and also the entire city of Minneapolis. This did not happen for Minnesota. Minnesota really thought that after instigating all these regulations and everything like that, that they would get a clean bill of health the next time that there was going to be, you know, a water test. Because basically, hey, I am an awesome state, and we've already taken all these parameters for 64 years. We've been great. How could we not pass, you know, a water inspection? But in 1985, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and the Minnesota Department of Health performed a mass groundwater analysis. Results were not what was going to be expected. Based on the survey, both pesticides and nitrogens from agricultural crops had contaminated the groundwater in certain cities. One thing I want to point out is that in these earlier days, when they didn't have, you know, spectrometers and stuff like that to actually test for nitrogen, they would use ratios of pesticides and follow where those pesticides were coming from which farms, in order to assume that there was nitrogen in the water. So it wasn't 100%, but it was close enough. These surveys basically said that, hey, there was contamination in municipal water systems, and there's also contamination in private wells. Now, the problem is that private wells do not run under the jurisdiction of the state, the county, the federal government, anything like that. That falls under the personal landowner. But the municipal systems called for direct action. I mean, that you are providing water for almost probably thousands of people, and your water can't be contaminated. Not only did the state fail this groundwater test, but in 1988, the state had one of the worst droughts ever recorded. And at this point, people in Minnesota realized, hey, we need to protect our water systems, because with this drought, I mean, businesses were shutting down, families didn't have water and everything like that, because they weren't utilizing it the way that they did. So after this after this drought, in 1989, the Groundwater Protection Act was passed, which created a legislative water committee. This committee was responsible for mass sampling of the state's groundwater to create a baseline document, and it's going to be comparative. So they wanted to make this baseline document that said, hey, you know, in 20 years when you're testing for water quality, here's something that you can go off of. You know, our testing probably is going to be different in the next 2 decades, but you have something to base your findings off of. This document was published almost a decade later, and it is actually still used in Minnesota's groundwater sampling techniques. This really helped ease a lot of citizens and government officials' minds, because this showed that the state of Minnesota was concerned about quality water for their citizens. So that was pretty awesome. However, during the mid-1990s, the economy of Minnesota crashed. Due to this catastrophe, the state had to limit where its money was going and what it was spending to. So the Legislative Water Committee was completely nixed out. It was not deemed, you know, necessary for the state money. And so that went away. As the 2000s rolled around, however, state realized that they really do need to maintain their water for its citizens, and they need to have up-to-date stats, and they need to have ongoing projects. So in 2003, the committee was created again to continue testing groundwater quality, and there has been sorry, my notes are going crazy. And with this committee and everything, they basically are having the longest set of necessary testing than any other time in the entire history of Minnesota. So they're testing, you know, certain parts of the states, different times of the year, for basically everything, and it's just going to keep going on. The Minnesota 2014, but that survey for 2013-2014 is also going to include, I think, part of 2015. They just said it was ongoing, but the results that they had now was only up until 2014. So, for the 2004 to 2005 results, there's a lot of contamination in the state, and it was due to high levels of nitrogen. It's important to note that the federal and state limit of nitrogen is 10 parts per million. Most of the wells that were tested had about 2.5 parts per million, which isn't crazy, but it still is concerning. However, in the Minneapolis metro area, the levels ranged anywhere between 2.5 to the limit of 10. The state survey also examined monitor wells in municipal systems versus domestic wells, which were owned by private individuals. Most of the monitored wells had an average of 2.5 parts per million nitrogen, whereas domestic wells had about 0.5 parts per million. Now, this really concerned a lot of people because a lot of the public was confused why their contamination was higher than that of a private well owner who doesn't really get state testing. But it's important to note that the monitored wells were only surveyed in urban areas with shallow aquifers, and the domestic wells, for the most part, are located in very deep aquifers. So your amount of contamination is going to be different due to, amount of water, the temperature of the water, and everything like that. Interestingly, the domestic wells tested inside the city limits of Minneapolis were less than or equal to 2.5 parts per million nitrogen. But those wells in the central metro area were greater than 2.5 parts per million. What's even more crazy is that on the outskirts, towards the east outskirts of the metropolitan area, these wells were reading between 2.5 to 10 parts per million. This is huge. So basically you can see a proliferation of where the concentration of nitrogen is going and where it's coming from and where it's settling and everything like that, and that's kind of disturbing. So this survey is showing in 2004 to 2005 that in areas like Dakota County, which is right on the outskirts, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit, it's showing how diverse the contamination can be. For citizens in Dakota County in 2005, it was probably scary to think about that you or your neighbor's well could be completely contaminated. Hastings, which is the county seat of Dakota County, uses 100% of its groundwater to provide clean water for its citizens. So imagine those people when these survey results came out about all this contamination. Well, it didn't get much better. In 2013 to 2014, Minnesota began developing a statewide survey that would attempt to cover major areas where there was agricultural use, and they basically wanted to see, why, how, where this major contamination was happening. They're still trying to figure out how to prevent this from happening. They're also trying to figure out how does farming affect 1.2 million wells throughout the state. They're not 100% sure. They know that it's from excess pesticides, but they're not sure how and why there's such an excess of this nitrogen. At the moment, only 8 counties have been analyzed. Most of these are in areas of current or previous agricultural use, and these are areas in the northwest and east of Minneapolis. Right now, approximately 70,000 wells are estimated to be tested due to previous survey results showing high levels of contamination. The first 2 counties were Dakota and Washington, and they're located in the eastern metro area of Minneapolis. The results here in both these counties were not very good. Throughout the 8 counties that have been surveyed, 16 communities with city-regulated water have high levels of nitrogen contamination. And these 16 communities have had to basically say, hey, we're going to require that there needs to be nitrogen removal systems. However, nobody is helping these homeowners pay for this. And it's saying that the cost is about $3,300, and that's not including the maintenance and upkeep of these systems. There's another 45 communities, that are estimated to have problems associated with nitrogen levels, but they are trying to prevent nitrates in their water without using the filtration systems. So that's pretty interesting, topic, because, it's a really big deal. and everything are going to just show us, just some information. So when we are looking at, the state of Minnesota as a whole, this is showing statewide the amount of nitrogen produced. This is showing the amount of nitrogen contamination. Okay. This is where our study area is, which is Dakota County. It's right in here. I believe this is Dakota right here. So Dakota is right here. So you can see that in the southern part of the state, that's where a lot of the nitrogen's coming from. That's probably the most, agriculturally used area. So this goes into the Vermilion River right here, and it just drops all off right here into little Dakota County. So this is where the nitrogen's been produced, and then we go over to this chart, and we're like, oh hey, let's see where the nitrogen levels are really, really high. And as you can see right here, the total nitrogen levels right here in little old Dakota County, they're right on the verge between 3.25 and 9.99. Now, granted, I want to let you know that these are not up to date right here. I believe that these are probably mid-2000s data, but still it gives you an idea of how long and how contaminated and how much nitrogen in general in the state is produced that's causing problems for the communities. So, now we are going to discuss the beautiful county of Dakota. So, Dakota County is right here. It is right here. And this is the whole state of Minnesota. Imagine some lakes and stuff. But that's where we're going to be. So what we're going to look at right now is we're going to see how the entire state of Minnesota, basically, their land usage, their lack of controlling contamination and everything, how it's seriously affecting citizens and those living in Dakota County, Minnesota. So some background information. Dakota County is a smaller county. It's about 587 square miles, but it houses over 398,000 people. This county is the third most populous in Minnesota, and its population has increased because of this entire interstate system that just kind of linked Dakota to everything. And I believe, right there is Hastings, so that's the little county seat right there. Now, as you can see, there's water, and then there's all of these interstates connecting right here. So it's no wonder why Dakota basically became a very popular county. So the county seat is Hastings. In the 20th century, this town was a focal point for transportation, communication, and commerce based on its location. It has a vertex to three major waterways. You've got the Mississippi River, the St. Croix River, maybe, I don't really know how to pronounce that, and the Vermilion River. Dakota County is also a very diverse county when you examine it based on inside its borders. So the north and the south part of Dakota County are basically two totally different cultures. The northern part, which I would assume is probably going to be right through here, so I would make an adjacent area right here. Probably this whole area, since it is closer to the metropolitan area of Minneapolis, is going to be more, suburbia. It's going to be more of a typical metropolitan outskirt area of a very large city. You're going to have a lot of hustle and bustle. You're also going to have a lot of people that work inside the city traveling back into the outskirts in Dakota County to live there, so they don't have to deal with, the craziness of Minneapolis 24/7. However, in the southern part of Dakota, there hasn't been a lot of change since the early settlers. It's very small town USA, still very rural, and unlike the northern part of the county, there's not a lot of economic diversity. There's not a lot of, new job openings happening because nobody really wants to move there because it's not close enough to the city, and it's just not attractive. So a lot of people that live there, are forced into situations where once they move there, they can't get out. And that's a really, really big problem, because people that are trying to get out right now can't leave because of the water contamination. So the southern part of this county is also suspected to be the main source of the nitrogen contamination in the groundwater of the county. And that is, a huge deal that also makes the southern part of the county not look as appeasing or for, new people. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about nitrogen, and I know probably most of you have an idea of how nitrogen works in, everyday life, and how people are, have to basically have nitrogen for everyday life functions, but a lot of people don't really understand how it works chemically, in plants, blah, 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 blah. So nitrogen is necessary for every living organism. It is one of the 8 basic elements that create our amino acids. Nitrogen is an important nutrient. It's considered a primary nutrient for plants and other consumers. That means that this is one of those nutrients that they cannot function without. And the problem is that plants, unlike humans, who can breathe in the nitrogen and utilize it within their bodies, plants can't do that. Plants actually have to be able to have a certain type of nitrogen and take it up through their roots and then utilize it, to create what they need for their basic life functions. So in order to receive the nitrogen to survive, plants must rely on nitrogen fixing bacteria, fungi, decomposers, all that good stuff, to release the stored material in decomposing mass, things that are dead, feces, all that stuff, back into the soil. And then the plants can absorb that through their roots, and then the cycle continues. So this right here, I just kind of want to point out real quick. It's very basic. It's just showing, hey, here's some nitrogen runoff and everything like that. Here's the fertilizer. Now this is more complex than just the regular nitrogen cycle, which is just like, hey, here's manure. They're going to break everything down. Oh, look, it's going into the soil. Yay. Plants are going to be able to take it up. Oh, happy. And then the cow would be eating the plants. But this is kind of showing more of, not an elementary school drawing of nitrogen. This is showing, hey, this is what's happening in everyday life. So the contamination problem for nitrogen in Minnesota is the biggest issue that is causing mass chaos in the state. So many years ago, the farmers began to realize that fecal matter from their livestock helped their plants grow. So what they did is they would reuse fecal matter to ensure that their crops, had bigger productions of goods, and also would, what's the word I'm looking for? Have a turnover rate quicker. Sorry about that. So this is where the idea of fertilizing your plants came from. And this was all natural, and it was reusable, and farmers were super happy. However, it became unsanitary and therefore illegal for farmers to use fecal matter to provide fertilizer for their crops. So the farmers had to figure out new ways to get nitrogen to their crops, because, hey, you don't have, years or months and everything to grow corn. You only have, maybe a month or two, and then you have to produce a crop, and then another month or two, and then you have to produce more. And it's just one of those things. They wanted a faster turnover so they can increase that yield. They could increase, food for the American people, and also, increase the money in their pockets. So right now, since we can't use natural fertilizer, we're using what's called synthetic fertilizer. Synthetic fertilizers come in 3 separate ways: either ammonia salts, urea, or anhydrous ammonia. Each of these were created to divert the ban on using nitrogen-rich feces. Now, the ammonia salts can only release ammonia if sulfuric acid is present. Due to the salts having a due to the salts basically just having problems breaking down. So they need, that extra oomph of sulfuric acid. Anhydrous ammonia can only be released at high pressure, and the nitrogen in it can only be released at this high pressure. Therefore, it is mainly injected in the soil directly and immediately converted to nitrogen ions, which isn't too bad, but that is causing, injection areas, extreme pressure, that's a whole issue dealing with soil. And finally, urea decomposes into ammonia as soon as it hits water. So, we can, as plants and as decomposers, they can fix ammonia, but it's also, there's ammonia in our water, okay? These methods, although they don't seem that bad compared to, our everyday lifestyle choices, but the problem is that these fertilizers need a petroleum source to synthesize the nitrogen. Petroleum uses the H-positive ions to synthesize with nitrogen to get the process moving. Therefore, not only are we going to be putting this excessive amount of nitrogen and other, industrial chemicals and stuff into our water and into our soil, we're also adding petroleum, because that's what our fertilizers need to help crops produce. So it's either fecal matter, which is kind of gross, but it doesn't require petroleum and it doesn't require all this damage to the environment, or synthetic fertilizers because it's more, sanitary. I don't know. That's something for you guys to decide on. So, after we realized, that agriculture and everything like that is a major source of this excessive nitrogen, we also realized that there's other land uses that create an excess of nitrogen. With the use of these synthetic fertilizers, farmers realized that their cash crops could grow faster and be the best. However, the problem is that these cash crops are considered nitrogen-consuming crops, and these are crops such as wheat and corn. So, what happens is that these cash crops, like this corn and this wheat, have very short root systems. So when this nitrogen is broken down by the decomposers, and their little soluble ions, which can move easily throughout the soil and everything like that, just waiting for a root and everything to get that, if they're not close to the top part of that soil, they just leach through that soil and they go straight down into the groundwater. So you have, acres and acres of these nitrogen-consuming crops, and nothing is picking up this excess nitrogen because none of the root systems are long enough. So this is causing a problem, in the groundwater system, but it's also causing a problem because nothing's holding the soil together, and the soil's now starting to just, become very porous. And that's going to cause problems later on. So the idea behind this is, how can we prevent this groundwater contamination? And the problem is that groundwater contamination, based on nitrogen levels, is considered one of the first signs of poor groundwater quality. Now, there are other places when excess nitrogen can come from, and that's feedlot runoff, which is from the fecal matter, urban areas, which is just basically pollution. But right here, this just kind of gives you an idea how humans are causing these problems. It's basically causing us to have unsanitary and unhealthy conditions for our families and our communities. So one of the big issues with excess nitrogen is how it's going to affect humans. And there have been, studies that have proven that nitrogen can cause illness. And there are some out there that say it can possibly cause cancer, but they're not proven. It's just a suggestion. But the average adult, they consume nitrogen consumption. They already consume about 20 to 25 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. So excessive amounts of nitrogen doesn't really affect the average adult. But it does affect infants, pregnant women, and those with certain issues like heart problems and low blood pressure and anemia and stuff like that. And this nitrogen can basically just cause pain and suffering. So, we have got this word, and give me a second, methemoglobinemia. Methemoglobinemia. Alright. I can definitely read it, but I can't pronounce it for the life of me. What this is that when your body, in your red blood cells, you've got hemoglobin, right? And everybody's had basic biology. Hemoglobin can take, I believe it's 4 oxygen cells, 4 molecules of oxygen to run through your body. If your body needs some oxygen there, they release it, and then on their way, it's just a repeating cycle. The problem is that this bulimia causes your hemoglobin to capture these oxygen, but it can't release it. It cannot release it to areas of your body, your muscles, and your organs that need this oxygen to, basically survive. So this is actually a big deal in infants, and the symptom is called blue baby syndrome. And this happens with those infants that are under 6 months of age. And it's because the bacteria in their GI is so sensitive, and their hydrochloric acid is not, their pH of it is not very high. And what happens is that these infants will drink high levels of nitrogen, and instead of their GI tract turning it into nitrate, which is okay, that's perfect, it turns it into nitrite. And then the nitrite binds to the oxygen on the hemoglobin and doesn't allow the hemoglobin to release the oxygen to the necessary and vital parts of the rest of the body. So therefore, you're basically, from the inside out, starving certain places of your body for oxygen. And that's where the idea of blue baby syndrome came from, because you can tell if a baby has this, if there's blue rings around the eyes, around the mouth, fingertips, anything like that, basically all extremities, because that's what your body's going to kill off first. So at the moment in Minnesota, there were no cases since the 1980s. But this excess amount of nitrogen in the groundwater has caused new cases of blue baby syndrome to be showing up. And that is a scary issue. As a mother, as, a community member, anything like that. Like, there are children that are getting sick due to contamination problems that have been known for decades. And nobody has done anything about it. And they're going to do something now. But, are we sure that it's not too late? So in Dakota County, the water problems have also become the livelihood problems for the homeowners and citizens. So the high levels of groundwater contamination is not just in the private well owners, it's also in the municipal city wells also. About 1/5 of the wells in the county that were tested were over the federal limit of 10 parts per million nitrogen. And in Hastings, half of the wells that were tested were contaminated. This is insane. This is scary. This is, hey, how is this excess nitrogen going to affect my life later down on the road? Or how's it going to affect, my child or my ability to get pregnant? Like, that is a scary, scary thought. The biggest, some citizens have decided to install RO units in their household to fight the nitrogen problem. However, these units are expensive. And that doesn't even include the maintenance fees and the keep up and everything like that. And even if you get an RO filtration unit, it is not advised that kids drink the treated water. So you're still going to have to buy, distilled water or whatnot from the grocery store just so then your babies can, have clean water. The biggest problem for this county is the fact that since it is split in half, almost half of the county has private drinking wells. And you're mainly going to see that in the southern part of the state, southern part of the county. These private wells, like I said before, are not regulated by, health commissioners and stuff like that in the county. It is up to the private owners, who half the time probably don't even think about contamination. So that's a problem, because we've got people that are not educated in the idea that their groundwater can be contaminated, and they could be drinking. What they're drinking might taste fine, but is not good for them. Some of the individuals in these areas want to get on city water, but by the time they paid for the pipings and the hookups, the money is just ridiculous. So some of these people that have these contaminations are having issues because it's either, hey, you're going to have to clean your water up or get on city water, and either way, they're going to be basically, bankrupt after the situation. So that's a problem for the economic factor of southern Dakota County. And some of the homeowners that are trying to get out of the state and sell their homes can't, because you can't sell a home that has this contamination and can't get approval to sell it until the contamination is dealt with. So, families are being stuck there due to this groundwater contamination. And that's just crazy, People don't think about this. 30 years ago, nobody thought about this, but, it's a problem. So right now, the county and the state are working on some ideas on how to treat this problem. There's no definite, this is how we're going to fix it, because there's too many variations on, we can't kill off the economy and destroy all the farms, because that's going to leave people, homeless, and without jobs. But we also can't keep risking the quality and the quantity and basically the health of our other citizens for farmlands. So county-wise, Dakota County is urging citizens to schedule their routine checkups, especially for nitrogen. At least, once a year, once every other year, anything like that. They're also encouraging certain places to install filtration units. And, that'd be all fine and dandy if it wasn't just so expensive. And the problem is that RO units actually are wasteful. For every gallon of RO water that you get, 2 gallons are wasted. But however, the one thing that is awesome about Dakota County is the fact that the mayor, who realizes that a lot of these people in this county can't afford city water, cleaning up, or, filtration, he's asking the state for subsidies to help provide these people with some financial aid to clean up their water and have clean, healthy water, which I think is just totally awesome. Also, some of the county citizens in Dakota are going to the farmers in the outskirts and are talking to them, and educating them about, the contamination problems and everything like that. They're also bringing up this idea of rotational cropping, which is basically the cash crops like the wheat and the corn that are nitrogen consuming. Each season you replace them, after they're completely, done for the season, they produce as much corn, as much wheat as they want. You replace them with nitrogen. Hold on, what's the other? Nitrogen retaining crops. And those are going to be like your beans, your legumes, and all that stuff. And what these will do is these will actually hold extra, like they have longer root systems and everything like that, and they'll actually maintain a certain amount of nitrogen in the soil, keep the soil compact and everything like that. And that's a great idea, and that's what they used to do back in the day. But once, they realized, hey, we don't really have to change anything, we can just, keep the same crops and keep getting our money, nobody really cared. Some of the state ideas is to, right now they're in the process of issuing a law where they regulate that farmers can't lay down fertilizer in the fall. This is the Nitrogen Fertilizer Management Plan. Additional programs and ideas that they have proposed are that the Minnesota Department of Agriculture will educate and get volunteers to participate in water testing. The Farm Nutrient Management Assessment Program will have surveys regarding fertilizers, and this will, deal with usage and general opinion of them. Has specialists throughout the state for both farmers and non-farmers to get in touch with to ask questions regarding irrigation systems, fertilizer methods, farming methods, etc. Mandate nitrogen tests on farms every single year, and this is the basal stalk nitrogen test. And what this does is it just tests the amount of nitrogen left over after each season in the farmlands. And this can help people, say, this is the healthier soil, this is not the healthier soil, this is, blah, 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 blah. And the farmers can actually start thinking of how to not always have those cash crops. And finally, require some of the farms to actually have nitrogen managers that regulate and control the amount of nitrogen on that farm. all of these are really, really awesome ideas, and I really hope that Minnesota can get their stuff together. Solution to Dakota County's problem. At the moment, they're trying to do basically anything and everything that they basically can to kind of, keep their citizens at ease. I don't think it's going to be an easy fix whatsoever. I think that, based on the excessive amounts of nitrogen that they've been using over the years and over the decades, it's going to be really hard to keep clean water in these areas because they're so polluted. And the thing is that, you can't just end agriculture because it's necessary for the economy, but where do you find that right balance? And is it really worth installing, these nitrogen filtration systems and these RO filtration systems when the amount of product that you receive doesn't equal the amount of, trash or, excess water that you can't use? So it's just going to be hard for the state of Minnesota and Dakota County to basically, come up with a resolution to this serious problem. I think that they need to keep talking to the local farmers, keep educating the local farmers, educating people in these areas, and mandate nitrogen testing for the farms so then that, this doesn't happen this bad again. The state needs to increase farmland nitrogen testing, maybe not just once a year, maybe a few times a year. And also, I think that they need to hire nitrogen experts on these farms so then the citizens, the farmers, and the communities can all be peaceful with each other and, stop having all these contamination issues. Alright, guys. Well, thank you so much. If there's any questions, just write in the comments and everything. I'm sorry that this took a very long time, but, I hope you enjoyed it. Alright, thank you so much. Bye.